The Masculine Stigma. Beyond the armor, why true courage requires the death of the macho. Before I begin, I must remind you that this is not a source of information, but rather a reflective essay with the purpose of connecting various ideas to explain a phenomenon that has been occurring for millennia. There may be moments when you feel I am taking sides in a bilateral discussion, but I can assure you that is not my objective. What I seek is for us to test these ideas, discuss them, and try to reach the truth. I recognize the importance of the feminist movement, however, its denomination can generate misinterpretations. As far as I have researched, the ultimate goal of feminism is to seek equity and opportunities for men and women, punish acts of sexual and gender discrimination, as well as promote harmony among human beings regardless of their sex or gender. Unfortunately, with a name like feminism, it seems we are giving more weight to the female sex than to cultural equality. I know it has its reasons for being, but that doesn't prevent many people from deciding to seek female supremacy over harmonious treatment. However, this is not about ranting, but understanding why this movement had to occur in the first place. And the reality is that the monsters of toxic masculinity are the result of practices, ideas, judgments, and conditioning from both males and females. Like many current social constructs, we could trace certain gender roles back to before Homo sapiens was such. As animals in nature, males and females of various species develop certain differentiated characteristics, although with wide individual variability. In general terms, in the primitive human species, males tended to have more muscle mass and females greater resistance to pain and more acute sensory perception. These biological differences influenced, though did not absolutely determine, the distribution of certain group tasks. Then, at some point not so very long ago, what Yuval Noah Harari, the author of the book Homo sapiens, called the cognitive revolution happened, and suddenly humans were able to transmit complex and abstract ideas through stories, values, and laws. We acquired the ability to judge and grow as a species. We developed spiritual practices like animism and later religion. And we began to understand complex concepts. Eventually, we were forced to reconcile our animal instincts with these new ideas and structures. This is the origin of patriarchal and matriarchal structures, where authority figures fall on the male or female sex. But regardless of which social structure a particular culture chose, the distinctive roles of animals seem to have transcended, and regardless of whether the cultural leader was a man or a woman, men had the responsibility of defending the community, at least in most cases, the honorable exception being the Amazons. And this role of protector led us to perfect a great number of attributes that define the modern man. The idea of strength and endurance as pillars, since against any physical threat, these are decisive factors for victory. The fear of becoming easy prey led us to perfect the art of not showing weakness and hiding our emotions. The rigidity of tactical strategies made ancient men intolerant of disobedience or questioning of authority, and in a crisis situation, it is understandable why these types of situations must be applied. As time progressed, these ideas not only endured but were applied to other aspects that had nothing to do with battles. For centuries, women were forbidden to board or work on marine vessels. I don't know if it was for fear of softening the crew, distracting them with sexual temptations, or simply because the stigma was that the profession of sailor was exclusive to men. As time went on, more ideas and more aspects of the masculine stigma permeated our society. And perhaps the most ironic thing is that even women agreed with it. A clear but misunderstood example is the concept of chivalry, as a set of rules that give preferential treatment to women and impose a code of conduct on men. What many people don't talk about is that these behaviors operated under the premise that women are inferior beings. That's why they were given preferences, and why men were required to behave in certain ways. I'm surprised that there are still women today who demand that men be chivalrous, and I suspect they don't know this fact. Finally, we arrive at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, when an idea began to emerge that in retrospect was obvious but not very popular: each human being is unique and individual. And it is really here where the greatest dissonance began to occur. Where the roles that for millennia had dictated our behavior were called into question by the idea of individuality. Where the idea of a sensitive man or an effeminate man caused great problems. And let's be clear, it's not that these types of men had not appeared in the past. But they were exceptions to the rule. At that moment in time, we witnessed how people began to question gender roles. Not only with men but with women, who for centuries before had demonstrated that women's physical limitations were not social limitations, such as for taking charge of a property or a business. Which led women to request the right to vote, and other norms of equality. It is probably at this time that the true monsters of masculinity began to emerge. With the pressure of an equitable society, the conservatives of gender roles began to put more emphasis on conditioning that reinforced these behaviors. And if before no one doubted that a man's word was law, now they had to prove it, with violence in a great number of cases. And here comes the sad part: while the feminist movement still has much to do to achieve true equality, in general, the idea that men and women should have equal opportunity has been mostly accepted, and work is being done to offer equal conditions to men and women. However, as there has not been a similar movement for men, giving them the opportunity to let go of those old beliefs, they continue to be educated to maintain this role of protector and these ideas of strength, endurance, and command above all else. I want to be very clear on this aspect. This does not excuse or exempt any man for exercising violence of any kind. This only serves to understand the cause, not to free them from responsibility. We have to be more conscious of how we treat men, convince them of the benefits of letting go of these old ideas, abandoning these old stereotypes of the macho, the strongman, the Don Juan, the lone wolf, and seeking an identity more centered on their true self. A common tactic of society to reinforce these roles is shame, and that's where doubly offensive expressions like "you cry like a little girl" come from, implying that showing emotions will take away their status as a man. When the reality is that, if in that aspect women are stronger than men, they have the freedom to express themselves, and the option to lead a more stable emotional life. I say option because there are still very unstable women. So, we can say that the problem of toxic masculinity is the result of ideas that initially made sense but are now outdated. Reinforced by teaching methods that have not been modified, and that continue to be imparted, and groups of people who for one reason or another benefit from these old ideas remaining in force, for example, men with desires for power and control, or opportunistic women who take advantage of these cultural clauses. The real challenge of being a man today lies in the apparent lack of healthy alternatives to exercise masculinity. The old models persist, but they no longer respond to current realities. Recognizing this stigma is the first step. It's not about exclusively blaming men or victimizing them, but understanding that we all participate in perpetuating these models: the mothers who repress their sons crying, the fathers who demand excessive toughness, the partners who expect invulnerable providers, and the society that punishes masculine sensitivity. Change will begin when we stop associating fundamental human qualities such as empathy, vulnerability, or emotional expression exclusively with the feminine, and recognize that they are an integral part of any complete human being, regardless of gender. We don't have all the answers yet, but making these patterns visible and questioning them openly is the beginning of the path toward a society where being a man doesn't mean wearing an emotional armor that limits both the wearer and those around them. Remember, the power is yours.